Guards shoved Oral forward through the towering marble doors, their iron grips bruising his arms despite his half-vampire strength. The halls chill bit into his skin like 1,000 judging eyes, courtiers in shadowed silks lining the walls, whispers slithering like serpents. He straightened, chin high, refusing to flinch as the envoy's seal burned heavy against his chest. Proof he spoke for the border towns, not as the child pawn his mother had bartered 20 years ago. That memory clawed up unbidden, little Oral, ate and trembling, dragged before the throne to seal a fragile peace. "I'll marry you when I grow up, Queen Leora," he'd blurted, fist to heart in clumsy earnestness. The court had erupted in laughter, her silver peel the sharpest blade, carving humiliation into his bones. She'd been barely more than a girl herself then, newly crowned amid blood and ash, but her mirth had stripped him bare. Now he buried the shame deep, letting defiance armor him. He wouldn't beg. Not again. The throne loomed at the hall's end, a jagged spire of obsidian-veined marble where Queen Leora sat motionless, her raven hair coiled like a crown of night, crimson eyes unblinking. She was a blade sheathed in porcelain skin, every line of her posture screaming control. No flicker of recognition crossed her face as their gazes locked, only a measured curiosity, like a predator sizing a stray cur that wandered too close. "Envoy Oral Martin," the herald boomed, voice echoing off vaulted ceilings, "bearer of petitions from the border holds." Leora inclined her head a fraction, the barest concession. "Speak your piece, then, the court listens." Oral stepped forward, the guards releasing him with a final shove that nearly buckled his knees. He caught himself, voice steady despite the pulse hammering in his throat. "The towns bleed under raids from rogue fangs, tithes unpaid, fields ash. They demand enforcement of the old treaty, your protection, majesty, or war at your gates." Murmurs rippled through the hall, courtiers leaning in, fangs glinting in torchlight. Leora's expression didn't shift, but her fingers tightened on the throne's arm, knuckles paling. "Protection is not free. What do they offer in return?" "Grain stores, labor for your forges, and me," Oral said, the words tasting like bile. "As surety as before." A shadow crossed her face, gone in an instant. She rose, gown whispering like dry leaves over stone, descending the dais with predatory grace. The court fell silent, air thickening with anticipation. She stopped inches from him, close enough he caught her scent, frost and faded roses stirring something treacherous in his veins. "You are no child now," she murmured, voice low, threaded with silk over steel. "But the treaty holds. You will serve in the palace, scribe duties in the lower archives, report to Steward Ellis at dawn." It was a slap disguised as mercy, buried in dusty scrolls far from power's heart, no audience with her counsel, no voice in the raids. He opened his mouth to protest. The towns needed more, but her gaze pinned him, warning him silent. Power thrummed between them, her immortal presence a wall he couldn't scale. Then movement caught his eye, a boy no older than 12, half hidden behind a pillar near the throne. Pale as moonlight, with jagged scars twisting up his neck like lightning, the child clutched a tattered book to his chest. His eyes wide, haunted silver locked on Oral's for a heartbeat before darting away. Prince Rowan, the court's fragile ward, whispered, survivor of some forgotten purge. Oral's chest tightened, the boy mirrored his own bartered youth too keenly. Leora followed his glance, lips thinning. "Rowan," she called softly, and the child emerged, steps hesitant. Up close, the scars wept faint silver under torchlight, half-vampire marks like Oral's own hidden beneath his collar. "Majesty," Rowan whispered, bowing awkwardly. She placed a hand on his shoulder, possessive yet gentle. "This envoy stays. You will assist in the ward's lessons, reading, history. The boy needs steady hands nearby." Oral blinked, shock lancing through him. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't angled for proximity to her one vulnerability. "I, Majesty, my duties." "Will include this?" Her tone brooked no argument, eyes flicking to Rowan with fierce protection before returning to Oral, probing, "Refuse and the treaty phrase." He swallowed the retort, nodding curtly. The concession unnerved him. Why tether him to her ward? Politics or something rower? Rowan's gaze lifted again, curious now, a fragile thread pulling at Oral's guarded heart. Before he could speak, a figure detached from the courtiers' throng, Chancellor Varro, lean and sharp as a stiletto, his gray-streaked hair slicked back, eyes like chipped obsidian. He swept forward, robes billowing, voice cutting the hush like a whip. "Majesty, if I may." Varro's bow was precise, deference laced with steel. The old blood laws stir. This half-blood envoy bartered once as whelp, now strutting as speaker treads dangerous ground. The edicts are clear, humans and halves unbound by oath wander at peril. Raids or no, we cannot harbor unchecked thirst within these walls. The hall ignited in murmurs, fangs bared in agreement. Oral's blood ran cold. Varro's reminder wasn't idle. Blood laws demanded fealty or fangs, exile or worse for unsworn like him. Eyes bored into him, hungry, measuring his worth as prey. Leora's posture stiffened, a glacier cracking. "Chancellor, your precedents serve the realm, not fear it." "Precisely, Majesty." Varro's smile was a blade's edge. "The laws bind chaos. This one arrives uncollared, unblooded to our vein. Let him roam and whispers become knives. Stability demands he remain under watch." Her gaze snapped to Oral, sharp as shattered crystal. For a breath, conflict warred in her eyes, duty against, what? Curiosity. The memory of that childish vow, she lifted a hand, silencing the court. "The envoy stays within palace walls, under my authority alone. No hunts, no trials until the treaty's proven." Varro bowed again, satisfaction curling his lips, but his eyes lingered on Oral, promising deeper games. "As you decree, Majesty." Dismissed, Oral turned to follow the steward, but Leora's voice halted him. "Martin." He faced her, pulse thundering. She stood alone now. Rowan retreated to shadows, courtiers dispersing like smoke. Up close, exhaustion shadowed her flawless face, centuries' weight in fine lines only he with half-vamp senses might catch. "Guard the boy well," she said, voice pitched for him alone. "Fail, and the walls close forever." It wasn't kindness, but the raw edge in her tone, the fear she buried under queenship hooked into him. He nodded, throat tight. "I won't be bartered again, Majesty, not by anyone." Her lips parted, a flicker of something human, regret, before the mask slammed down. "See that you aren't." Steward Ellis gripped his elbow, dragging him toward shadowed corridors. Marble gave way to torchlit stone, the palace swallowing him whole. Behind, Leora's gaze burned into his back, a promise or a cage. Rowan trailed at a distance, book clutched tight, stealing glances that begged alliance. Varro's words echoed, blood laws, uncollared thirst. Oral's hand strayed to the envoy's seal, now feeling like a leash. The rigid household absorbed him quietly as it had that laughing boy long ago. But this time he wouldn't vow foolishly. He'd watch, wait, and carve his own path or die refusing to bow. Deeper in, Ellis shoved open a chamber door, sparse, a cot, a desk piled with scrolls, iron-barred window overlooking spiked battlements. "Your post, dawn for lessons with the princeling, stray, and the guards feed." Oral dropped his pack, sinking onto the cot as the door locked. Footsteps faded, leaving silence thick as blood. His fingers traced the scars on his neck, mother's desperate mark, half-life curse. Leora's face haunted him, controlled yet cracked. Why the ward, why him? A soft knock, he tensed, rising. The door creaked open to Rowan, slipping inside like a ghost, eyes wide. "They said, you're to teach me, but don't let Varro near. He starves the rats in the cells, tests them." Oral knelt to the boy's level, heart twisting. "Why tell me?" Rowan glanced back, voice a whisper. "You looked at me like you saw." The door clicked shut behind him, sealing their fragile pact. Outside, the court schemed, blood laws looming. Inside, vulnerability bridged the chasm, Oral's defiance meeting the queen's hidden hunger, one guarded glance at a time. But as Rowan's small hand brushed his. "No, the decree stands," Chancellor Varro intoned, his voice silk over steel as he gestured to the shadowed maps sprawled across the obsidian council table. "The caravan's humans breached the border wards. blood tithe is law. Oral's chair scraped back before he could stop it, his pulse hammering against the vein in his throat. They're refugees, not tribute. The treaty with the Outer Holds guarantees safe passage for noncombatants. Drain them and you shatter every fragile alliance we've bled for. Silence cracked like ice. Eyes cold, glittering, turned on him from the ring of high-backed seats, lords and ladies in velvet and bone, their fangs glinting in the chandelier's bloody glow. Varro's brow arched, a predator's amusement. Queen Leora sat at the head, her pale hands folded, expression a flawless mask. She said nothing, her storm-gray gaze fixed on Oral alone. Laughter rippled first from Lady Aloan, sharp as shattered crystal. The half-blood pup lectures on law. Your mother's bargain barely bought you a seat here, boy. Insolent envoy, Varro added, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a reprimand that lashed like a whip. You forget your place. The queen's silence is assent. Retract or face the consequence. Oral's jaw clenched, heat flooding his face. He could feel the court's scorn coiling around him, thick as smoke, whispers of bartered whelp, echoes of that childhood humiliation when Leora had laughed at his wide-eyed vow of loyalty. But these humans' faces flashed in his mind, hollow-cheeked families clutching children against the border snows. He wouldn't bow. Consequence won't change facts. Blood tithe invites retaliation. Human realms muster armies while we squabble over scraps. The murmurs swelled to hisses. Varro's eyes narrowed, but Leora's voice cut through, cool and unhurried. Enough! The envoy's zeal is noted and reprimanded. Her gaze held Oral's, unreadable, a breath-held pause that stretched taut. Chancellor, convene a private review of the caravan's manifests at dawn. Verify claims before fangs fall. Council dismissed. Varro bowed stiffly, as Her Majesty decrees. The assembly rose in a rustle of silk and spite, filing out like shadows fleeing light. Oral stood frozen, the weight of their glares burning into his back. Leora's eyes lingered on him a fraction longer, probing almost before she swept from the chamber, her crimson train whispering over marble. He exhaled, fists unclenching. Pragmatic, not cruel. But the victory tasted like ash. He'd painted a target on himself. Hours later, in the dim corridor beyond the guest wing, footsteps pattered soft behind him. Oral turned, bracing for a late-night assassin or Varro's spies. Instead, Prince Rowan emerged from the gloom, his slight frame swathed in a too-large cloak, silver hair falling over scarred cheeks. The boy, half-vampire like Oral but frailer, marked by some old court purge, hesitated, clutching a small wooden carving. Envoy Oral? Rowan's voice was a whisper, eyes wide but steady. I heard about the council. Oral knelt to his level, masking surprise. Guards lurked at the hall's ends, but the prince had slipped them. Rowan, shouldn't you be abed? Queen's wards don't wander. The boy edged closer, offering the carving, a crude wolf whittled from bone. Made it for you, for speaking up. They never do for humans. His fingers brushed Oral's palm as he pressed it forward, cool and trembling slightly. Oral's throat tightened. No one had offered him anything without strings since his mother's desperate trade 2 decades past. He closed his hand around the gift, the bone warm from Rowan's grip. It's fine work, sharp teeth. He ruffled the boy's hair lightly, the gesture foreign, unguarded. For the first time in years, a flicker of uncomplicated warmth pierced the armor he'd forged, fragile like frost under sun. Rowan smiled, faint but real. Stay, tell me about the treaty humans. Are they, like me? Not quite, Oral murmured, sinking to sit against the wall. But they fight to protect their own, like you should. They talked in murmurs, Rowan asking about border winds, Oral spinning tales without the court's venom until the boy's yawns deepened. Oral walked him back, the simple trust a balm he hadn't known he craved. Dawn brought no reprieve. In a stark antechamber off the guard barracks, 2 armored sentries pinned Oral to a chair, their gauntlets bruising his arms. Varro paced before him, a ledger open to the caravan manifests. Defiance in council merits exile at minimum, Varro said, tapping a quill against fangs. Confess your sources, these refugees spies, your human blood makes you soft, Martin or bought. Oral forced a brittle laugh over controlling the tremor in his voice. Soft. I've spilled more blood than your ink, Chancellor. Check the manifests yourself. Queen's orders. One guard twisted his wrist sharper, pain lanced up his arm. Watch your tongue, half-breed, the humor cracked. Shame flooded hot, Oral's vision blurred, breath hitching as memories surged. His child self on the auction block, Leora's laugh ringing, the court's jeers branding him pawn. He buckled forward not from the grip but the raw ease of it, the way control shattered under pressure, leaving him exposed, small. Their innocence, he rasped, voice breaking. Just let the review happen. Varro's lip curled, pathetic. The queen will hear of this frailty. They released him at midday, shoving him into the corridor like refuse. Oral straightened his torn doublet, the wolf carving heavy in his pocket, and made for the great hall. Exile loomed, Varro's report would seal it. He wouldn't beg. But Leora waited there, alone amid towering tapestries of bloodied conquests, her silhouette framed by arched windows leaking gray light. No courtiers, no chancellor, just her. Your grace. He bowed stiffly, expecting the blade. She turned, eyes tracing the bruises blooming on his wrists. A pause, heavy with unspoken weights, the power she held, absolute, her silence in council a test he'd failed or passed, he couldn't tell. Chancellor recommends exile for disruption. Oral met her gaze, stubborn fire reigniting. Send me then, but the caravan stays intact, she interrupted, voice low, edged with something almost weary. Manifests confirmed, pragmatism envoy. Not mercy? She stepped closer, the air between them thickening, her scent night bloom and iron, stirring instincts he buried deep. Consent hung unspoken, she could command but didn't. You remain at court, under watch. He blinked, pulse stuttering. Why? Her lips thinned, a flicker of vulnerability shadowing her control gone in a breath. Reasons of state. But her gaze held his, lingering, protective instinct warring with caution in those gray depths. Forced proximity, a chain neither pulled. Dismissed, for now. Oral backed away, the wolf carving digging into his thigh. Survived, because she willed it. The court's scorn echoed in his ears, but her decision burned hotter, a dangerous tether, pulling him deeper into her orbit. Oral's boots scraped the marble as Chancellor Varro's voice sliced through the throne room's hush. Envoy Martin, you'll assist in the cipher chamber, now. He froze mid-step, the wolf carving still biting into his thigh pocket like a fresh bruise. Survived her mercy, now this. The court's eyes bored into him, whispers curling like smoke, but Varro's grip on his arm yanked him forward, past jeering nobles toward a side archway. No choice. Refuse, and he'd be the smuggler dangling from the gibbets by dawn. The cipher chamber reeked of ink and old blood, its vaulted walls lined with iron-bound ledgers under flickering gas lamps. Leora's inner circle huddled around a scarred oak table. Varro, two stone-faced scribes, and Prince Rowan perched on a stool, his small fingers tracing runes on wax tablets. The queen herself stood at the head, silver hair pinned like a crown of thorns, her black velvet gown pooling like shadow. Intercepted parchments littered the surface, human dissident codes, smudged with border mud, promising raids on blood tithes. These arrived at midnight, Leora said, her voice a blade's edge, not glancing up as she slotted a cipher wheel. Dissidents in the lowlands decode the supply routes before they arm. Oral's stomach twisted. Lowlands, his mother's people, scraping by on smuggled grain. He slid into the chair Varro shoved at him, pulse hammering. Collaborate with asterisk, her asterisk circle. After she'd spared him only to leash him tighter, Rowan glanced up, gray eyes wary under scarred brows, then back to his tablet. Leora leaned over the boy, adjusting his grip with a touch so light it barely stirred the air, protective, precise, like shielding a flame from wind. Here, the inverted thorn. Twist counterclockwise. Her finger guided his without demand, and Rowan nodded, lips parting in rare focus. Oral's quills scratched parchment as he cross-referenced the wheel. Efficient, too efficient. She'd pivoted from throne room executioner to this ward mother, cipher master without a wasted breath. No grandstanding, no cruelty for show, just results. It clawed at the monster he'd built in his head since childhood, the laughing tyrant who'd bartered him like chaff. Hours blurred, Varro barked corrections, scribes murmured tallies. Leora unraveled a knot of symbols with a single glance, her orders crisp. Cross the third glyph with the blood moon key. Rowan mark the outliers. The boy complied, his quill steady under her shadow. When a scribe faltered on a threat vector, dissidents targeting the palace wards, Leora's eyes iced over. Isolate it, double the eastern patrols, no leaks. Ruthless, yes, but tethered to the child's safety. Her gaze flicked to Rowan, softening a fraction before steel returned. Oral's caricature cracked, not mindless dominion, calculated, human-tainted even. He hated how it pulled at him, this glimpse behind the fortress. Break, Varro snapped at midnight's toll. The circle scattered scribes to bunks, Rowan trailing Leora like a ghost. Oral lingered, rubbing his temples until Varro thrust a lantern at him. Archives, verify the old keys, move. The palace archives burrowed deep, a labyrinth of dust-choked shelves under eternal dusk. Oral's lantern beam danced over crumbling tomes and locked reliquaries, the air thick with mildew and forgotten wars. He traced the cipher index, fingers numb, until a side alcove gleamed, glass cases of court trinkets, treaty baubles from centuries past. One caught the light, a silver locket etched with a lullaby motif. Twisting vines cradling a crescent moon, notes curling like whispers, sleep, little thorn, in shadows keep, his breath caught. Childhood flooded back, 7 years old, bartered into this court, clutching his mother's gift with that exact engraving. He'd sung it mangled in the treaty hall, voice cracking, promising eternal fealty. Leora, barely crowned, had laughed, peeling, cruel, shattering him before the assembly. A pawn's lullaby asterisk, she'd called it, eyes glittering. He pried the case open, heart slamming. Inside, the locket hung on a faded ribbon, initials scratched faint, A.M. his, stolen, kept. Why here amid forgotten relics? Memories surged, her laughter echoing, his cheeks burning, the court's roar. But now why preserve it? Footsteps echoed. Rowan slipped from the gloom, clutching a slate. You found it. Oral snapped the case shut. What? The locket. She keeps things, says they anchor the past. The boy's voice was threadbare, scarred throat bobbing. He hummed then, soft, sleep little thorn, the motif perfect, haunting. Oral's throat tightened. You know it? Rowan nodded, eyes distant. She sings it when storms come. For me, a private anchor, this scrap of melody binding the boy to her, now snagging Oral too, stakes twisted deeper, if she wielded even lullabies as weapons. Envoy, Varro's bellow yanked them back. The cipher chamber again, parchments decoded into maps of dissident camps. Leora studied them, Rowan at her elbow. Smuggler trails here, she said, tapping a line veering too close to the wards. Elia's core, human sympathizer feeding the lowlands. Oral's blood chilled. Elia's old family friend, the one who'd smuggled his mother out after the treaty. Harmless runner, dodging tithes to save starving kin. He's no dissident, just grain for orphans. Leora's gaze pinned him unyielding. He crosses ward lines, orders, sees at dawn, public draining. Example. No, the word burst out raw, he's not armed. Punish the camps, not silence. Her voice cracked like frost. The room froze, Varro smirking, scribes averting eyes, Rowan shrinking. Leora's hand slammed the table, maps jumping. You speak of asterisk, my asterisk wards, innocents die if smugglers breach. Precedent demands it. Oral's fists clenched, old wound flaring pawn again, protesting a queen's blade. Precedent or cruelty masked as order? Elias has kids, like, he bit off Rowan asterisk, but the boy flinched anyway. Her eyes narrowed, power coiling visible in the air's prickle. Your sympathy blinds you, step out of line again and you'll join him on the gibbet. Varro hauled him back, iron grip bruising. Dismissed, Oral stormed the corridors, rage boiling. Competent tyrant. Her method stripped bare, protect the fragile core, excise threats without mercy. Rowan's face haunted him, the boy who'd hummed asterisk his lullaby, now tethered to her ruthlessness. In the antechamber shadows, Rowan waited, slate clutched. She won't stop it. Oral knelt, voice rough. Then what? The boy traced the motif on his slate. Sleep, little thorn, sing it, for Elia's kids, she listens, sometimes. Oral's chest ached. Anchor or chain, the melody lodged deep, pulling him toward her orbit and the boy's fragile trust. But dawn loomed and her orders carved innocent blood. The tether tightened, burning. Leora watched from the archway's gloom, unseen, her fingers brushing her own hidden locket. Competence demanded sacrifice. But his protest echoed her old ghosts' attachments that bled realms dry. Would she bend or break them all? Oral's pulse thundered as the heavy door to Leora's private solar thudded shut, sealing them in velvet-draped silence broken only by the distant murmur of the court beyond. He didn't wait, couldn't, with the silver locket burning in his fist like a brand from childhood. "This," he said, hurling it onto the ebony table between them, "is why I came back, not your treaties or Varro's games. You promised me then as a scared boy bartered like cattle." "And you laughed?" Leora's gaze snapped to the locket, its chain coiled like a serpent. She stood motionless by the hearth, flames casting jagged shadows across her pale features, but her fingers twitched at her side, the barest fracture in her regal armor. For a heartbeat, the air thickened, charged with the weight of that long-ago chamber where his mother's desperate pleas had echoed, and a young queen's mockery had sealed his shame. Oral's chest tightened. He'd bared his throat here before, but never like this, demanding truth from the one who held his life in her hands. "You think I forgot?" Her voice was low, edged steel, but she didn't deny it. She stepped closer, not touching the locket, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that pinned him more surely than chains. "Your mother dragged you in, a half-blood pawn to sweeten her bargain, wide-eyed, clutching that trinket like it could buy loyalty. I laughed to gut her leverage, to show the court weakness invites knives. Cruelty was the mask, Oral. Beneath it," she paused, breath catching, her hand rising halfway to the locket before dropping. "Beneath it, I envied that tenderness you offered so freely. A child seeing a queen, not a monster. I buried it to survive." The admission hit him like fangs to the vein, raw, unexpected. He'd braced for dismissal, for Varro's precedent to drag him to the cells for his public outburst minutes ago, protesting the Chancellor's veiled threat against the human envoys. But this? Leora's voice cracked on the word asterisk, envied, her composure splintering just enough to reveal the hollow beneath. Oral's defiance faltered, replaced by a treacherous pull in his gut. She wasn't just the untouchable sovereign, she was starved, same as him. A sharp rap shattered the moment. The door creaked open before she could bid entry, and Chancellor Varro swept in, his robes whispering like accusations, a scroll clutched in his bony hand. "Majesty, the envoy's insolence demands sanction. Precedent is clear, public defiance merits the lash or worse, exile. The court watches, stability requires it." Oral tensed, every muscle coiling for the blow. Varro's eyes gleamed with that cold calculus, the man who sacrificed pieces for the board's greater game. But Leora moved first, gliding between them, her presence a wall of ice and fire. "No," she said flatly, snatching the scroll and tearing it in half with a flick that echoed like breaking bone. "Precedent bends to my will tonight. Oral Martin stays, unpunished." Varro's face drained of color, his motive laid bare in the twitch of his jaw, loyalty to the crown's iron traditions, flawed by his unyielding belief that mercy bred rebellion. "Majesty, this sets a fracture. The wards, the alliances." "Out!" Her command lashed like a whip, and Varro bowed stiffly, retreating with a venomous glance at Oral. The door slammed, leaving silence heavier than before. Leora's shoulders sagged a fraction, unseen by most, but Oral caught it, the cost of that protection. She'd exposed a chink, trading tailored court leverage for him. His mind reeled. Competence demanded sacrifice, she'd always ruled by that. Yet here she stood, guarding his neck when she could have crushed it. Footsteps pattered from the adjoining chamber, small and hesitant. Rowan slipped through the velvet curtain, his half-vampire eyes wide and shadowed, bandages peeking from his sleeve where old scars hid deeper ones. The boy, fragile anchor of the court's whispered hopes, clutched a wooden carving, a crude wolf he'd whittled during lessons. He didn't flinch from Oral, didn't hide as he did from Varro's stares. Instead, he crossed straight to the envoy, pressing the carving into Oral's palm. "For you," Rowan murmured, voice soft but steady. "You shouted truth out there like someone who stays." Oral's throat closed. No bravado rose this time, no cocky grin to mask the terror of being used again. He knelt instead, cupping the boy's hand in both of his, the carving's rough edges grounding him. "I'll stay as long as you need guarding, little wolf. No one's touching you while I'm here." Genuine, bone-deep, the words pulled from the wound of his own bartered youth. Rowan's trust pierced him, shifting something fundamental. Protection wasn't a ploy anymore, but a vow he meant to his marrow. Leora watched from the hearth, her expression fracturing further. The boy darted to her skirts then, clinging, but his eyes stayed on Oral, a bridge neither had built. In that shared gaze, vulnerability collided. Oral saw her not as the laughing queen of his nightmares, but a woman who'd armored herself against ghosts like his own, risking the realm for a fragile maybe asterisk. This could work, whispered through him, a dangerous bloom amid the thorns. Her eyes met his over Rowan's head, dark pools reflecting the same storm, more perilous than we thought asterisk. She'd bent precedent, admitted the tenderness she'd buried, and now the court would circle. Attachments bled realms dry, but denying this felt like starving in a feast. The air between them hummed, slow-burn tension coiling in lingering looks, her pulse visible at her throat, his breath held against the urge to close the distance. Consent hung unspoken, a thread pulled taut. She held the power, but he wouldn't bow. Rowan pulled back, oblivious, scampering to a side table with his treasures. Leora straightened, but her voice softened, laced with warning and want. "You've rewritten the board, envoy. Varro won't forget. Neither will I." Oral pocketed the carving beside the locket, his resolve hardening even as fear gnawed deeper. "Good, because I'm not here to lose." She stepped closer, the space between them shrinking to a breath's width, her fingers brushing his sleeve, not command but choice. The fragile admission bound them now, hurtling them toward a closeness laced with peril, where tenderness warred with thrones. Oral's pulse hammered as Leora's fingers lingered on his sleeve, her touch a spark against the chill of the chamber. "The borders bleed," she murmured, voice low and edged like a blade drawn in shadow. "Rebel fangs, humans and rogues alike tear at the treaty lines. I need eyes inside their camps, Oral. Your human blood calls to them like kin. Feed me their secrets." He froze, her words slicing through the fragile warmth of moments before. The queen's eyes, silvered by the dim throne room lanterns, pinned him not with command but a raw plea masked as strategy. Outside these walls, whispers of uprising had thickened the air for days. Scorched villages, vanished scouts, the court's fragile peace unraveling. But this, using him as bait, a bridge to his own kind, it reeked of the old bargain, his mother's desperate trade of a wide-eyed boy for alliance scraps. "My contacts," he said, voice steady despite the twist in his gut. "They're not spies. They're merchants, healers, people who trusted me to keep the peace." He stepped back, breaking her touch, the space between them a sudden chasm. Rowan's face flashed in his mind, the boy's quiet gaze during their last stolen walk in the gardens, scarred hands clutching a wooden carving like it was armor. Leora's jaw tightened, but she didn't retreat. "One whisper from you, through letters or shadowed meetings. Names, movements, supply lines. In return, Rowan stays untouched. Varro's already circling, pushing for the boy's exile as impure leverage." Her gaze dropped, a flicker of something human cracking her regal mask. "I've sworn never to wield lives like pawns. But the rebels don't bargain with thrones, they burn them." The weight of it crushed him. Rowan, that fragile half-blood ward she'd claimed as her own, the court's living reminder of vulnerability. Exile meant death in the wilds or worse, a rebel's trophy. Oral's fists clenched. He'd come here to mend treaties, not bleed for them. Yet the boy's trusting smile haunted him, mirroring his own buried terror of being discarded. "Fine," he rasped, "but if this twists back on them or me, you end it. No more shadows." She nodded once, sharp as a vow, and the deal sealed in silence. That night, in the flickering light of his chamber's single candle, Oral scrawled the first missive. "Rebel camp at Blackthorn Ford holds 50 blades, grain wagons from Eastmark. Strike points weak at the mill." His hand shook, ink smudging like blood. It echoed too perfectly. Child Oral paraded before her court, promising eternal loyalty, only for her laughter to ring out high, cruel, a queen's dismissal. Used, forgotten. He sealed the parchment, throat burning, and slipped it to a court runner under moonless sky. By dawn, Leora's forces moved, silent as mist, crippling the rebels' vanguard. Victory rippled through the halls, courtiers murmuring praise for her precision. But Oral felt the noose tighten. Each letter he sent carved deeper, his human ties fraying, contacts pulling away, eyes wary in their replies. "What game do you play, envoy?" one wrote. He was the bridge, yes, but bridges burned. Chancellor Varro struck at the evening feast, his voice silk over venom as he leaned toward a cluster of nobles near Oral's seat. The long table gleamed with crystal and rare vintages, Leora at its head like a shadowed idol. "Our queen's wisdom shines," Varro drawled, goblet raised. "Leveraging the envoy's unique position, how efficient. Stability demands instruments, after all played until they snap." Heads turned, gazes sharpening on Oral. He gripped his fork, knuckles white, the words landing like barbs. Varro's eyes met his across the table, smug with calculation, the chancellor's creed: sacrifice the few for the court's iron spine. Whispers spread, "She's using the half-blood just as his dam did." Leora's fork paused midair, her expression a flawless veil, but Oral caught the flicker in her posture, the subtle lean forward as if to shield him from the onslaught. "Enough," she said, voice cutting the din like frost. "The envoy serves by choice, as do we all. Question my methods, Varro, and question the throne." The chancellor bowed, oily smile intact, but the seed rooted. That night, alone in his quarters, Oral paced, betrayal sour on his tongue. She'd drawn him in, made him complicit, and now the court saw him as her tool, just like before. 3 nights later, the assassin came for Alara, one of Oral's contacts, a sharp-eyed healer who'd smuggled him messages from the human enclaves. Oral met her in a fog-shrouded alley beyond the court's outer wards, the city's underbelly reeking of damp stone and refuse. "The rebels know," she hissed, clutching a satchel of herbs. "Your letters, they trace back. They're coming for—" Steel flashed from the gloom. A cloaked figure lunged, blade arcing for her throat. Oral shoved her aside, drawing his own dagger, but the assassin was shadowfast, a vampire rogue with rebel stench. The fight blurred clash of metal, Alara scrambling back until a whirlwind erupted from the mist. Leora. She materialized like vengeance incarnate, slamming the assassin against the wall with bone-cracking force. Her fangs bared, she tore the blade from his grip, her gown ripping at the seams from the fury. "You hunt her kin." Through him, her voice was thunderlow, eyes blazing crimson. The assassin snarled a curse for the old blood and lunged again. She broke her own edict. No queen left the palace unguarded at night. It was law etched in precedent to prevent ambushes. Varro's law. But Leora pinned the rogue, her hand crushing his windpipe, silver claws drawing black blood. "Tell your masters, touch what's his, and I unmake your rebellion." A snap, neck broken, the body slumped, lifeless. Alara gasped, pressing against the wall while Oral stared, chest heaving. Leora turned, blood streaking her pale cheek, her breath ragged. She reached for him, hesitated, then cupped his jaw, gentle, trembling. "You're not an instrument," she whispered. "Not to me." He pulled away, heart warring. Gratitude flooded him, hot and unbidden. She'd risked throne, court, everything for his contact, for him. Her protectiveness mirrored his own for Rowan, a raw instinct that bridged their worlds. But the debt loomed, massive and jagged. She'd crossed her lines for him, yes, but he'd paid first, soul sliced by secrets, paraded as pawn anew. Intimacy deepened in the breach, her touch lingering in his memory like a brand, yet mistrust festered. What exploded from this? A partnership forged in blood or a throne toppled by the Chancellor's whispers? Rowan's safety hung by the thread he'd woven, but at what cost to his own fractured trust? Leora sheathed her claws, eyes searching his, the alley's fog curling around them like unspoken promises and threats. Varro's voice sliced through the council chamber like a blade unsheathed, his skeletal fingers slamming a sheaf of parchments onto the obsidian table. The envoy Oral Martin bartered crown secrets for rebel intelligence treason by the ancient edicts. He fed whispers of our ward's movements to the resistance, endangering Prince Rowan himself. Gasps rippled from the assembled courtiers, their eyes snapping to Oral where he stood rigid beside Leora's throne, the alley's fog still clinging to his cloak like a shroud. Oral's pulse hammered in his ears, the half-vampire blood in his veins turning cold. He'd confessed the deal to her in that shadowed alley, moments after shielding Rowan from the assassin's blades, trusting her silence as the barest thread of alliance. Now Varro's trap snapped shut, every face in the vaulted hall turning accusatory, the torchlight carving their features into masks of judgment. Leora's hand rested on the arm of her throne, claws retracted but knuckles white, her gaze fixed forward as if he were already vapor. "Highness," Varro pressed, his voice oily with false deference, "the law demands his fangs extracted, his blood spilled in the square. Favor one half-breed pawn over the court's sanctity, and we invite chaos." The chamber held its breath, courtiers leaning forward like vultures scenting rot. Oral met Leora's profile, willing her to see the truth in his eyes. The bargain had unmasked the plotters circling Rowan, saving the boy she'd claimed as her own. But her jaw tightened, a flicker of something raw crossing her face before it iced over. She rose, her crimson gown whispering against the stone, voice ringing clear and merciless. "Oral Martin, your recklessness mocks this court's laws. You are no envoy, but a liability, a human-tainted fool who barters loyalty like a street thief." The words landed like lashes, each one stripping the fragile warmth from their alley pact. Courtiers murmured approval, Varro's thin lips curling in triumph. Oral's chest caved, the public scourging worse than any physical torment. She'd chosen the throne's facade over him, proving he was just another pawn in her endless game. He bowed his head, fists clenched at his sides, tasting blood from where his teeth pierced his lip. The humiliation burned deeper than the treaty that had bartered him as a child, her childhood laughter echoing in his mind. She hadn't denied the treason, she'd owned it, wielding his vulnerability as her shield. Leora waved a hand, dismissing the clamor. Council adjourned. "The matter is mine to resolve." The doors groaned open, courtiers spilling out like shadows fleeing dawn, Varro lingering with a predator's smirk before vanishing into the throng. Alone in the echoing chamber, save for the loyal guard Captain Alara at her flank, Leora turned to Oral. Her eyes bored into him, stormy with unspoken fury not at him, but at the cage Varro had forged. "You will not touch him," she commanded Alara, voice low and edged with venom. "The plotters, those three who slipped the intelligence to the rebels, dragged them to the undercrypts, flogged their backs raw, then chained them for the dawn. Let the court see justice served on true traitors." Alara nodded, her armored boots thudding as she saluted and strode out, barking orders to unseen sentries. Oral straightened, hope flickering despite the rebuke's sting. She'd protected him, diverted the blade. "But you," Leora continued, her tone sharpening to a blade's edge, stepping close enough that her cool breath ghosted his skin, "are confined to your quarters until I deem you reformed. Speak of this to no one, or I'll hand you to Varro myself." She turned away, shoulders rigid, the distance she enforced a wall thicker than stone. Oral's throat closed, protection laced with cruelty, sparing his life but grinding his trust to dust. He was her tool, nothing more, bartered and discarded at whim. "As you command, Highness," he rasped, voice hollow, before pivoting on his heel and stalking from the chamber. The heavy doors thudded shut behind him, sealing her in her isolation. In the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, torch sconces flickered like dying stars, casting his shadow long and warped. Servants scattered at his approach, whispers trailing him like smoke. His chambers loomed ahead, a gilded cage mocking his envoy's title. He slammed the door, leaning against it as the weight crashed down. The intelligence bargain had been his gambit to prove worth, to shield Rowan from the knives Varro's faction sharpened in the dark. Instead, it exposed him, and Leora's rebuke had shattered the illusion of partnership. He crossed to the narrow window overlooking the mist-shrouded spires, fists braced on the sill. Beyond the court's iron gates, resistance leaders waited, humans and half-breeds like him, plotting from fog-veiled enclaves. Join them, and he'd trade gilded chains for purpose, expose the court's rot without begging for her mercy. No more bartering his dignity for a queen's fleeting glance. The thought tempted, a siren's call amid the ache in his chest. Rowan's wide eyes flashed in his mind, the boy's fragile trust mirroring his own shattered one. Leaving meant abandoning him to Varro's schemes, but staying made him the fool she named him. Footsteps echoed outside, guards posted like hounds. He sank onto the edge of the bed, head in hands, the half-vampire thirst gnawing at his resolve. She'd saved him publicly in the cruelest way, proving power always trumped vulnerability. Trust fractured, he weighed the door to freedom against the boy he'd sworn to protect. In the throne room, now empty save for the echo of dripping wax from guttered candles, Leora gripped the armrests until the carved bone cracked under her fingers. Varro's ambush had cornered her, yield to law and lose oral, or rebuke him and preserve the court's brittle unity. She'd chosen the rebuke, words chosen to wound just enough to sell the lie, shielding him from sanction while her guards rooted out the true venom. But as silence pressed in, doubt coiled like smoke in her lungs. His eyes in the chamber raw, betrayed, mirrored the boy she'd laughed at decades ago, the one whose earnest vow she'd crushed to harden her own heart. She'd protected Rowan through him, yes, but at what cost? The alley's fragile bridge, forged in blood and fog, now lay in splinters. Orders wouldn't mend it, captains and floggings couldn't rebuild what her coldness had demolished. She pushed from the throne, cloak swirling as she moved toward his quarters, not to command, but to face the fracture she'd wrought. Vulnerability clawed at her, unbidden and terrifying, but for the first time, domination felt like the true defeat. The door to the corridor beckoned, her steps measured, the weight of repair settling heavy on her shoulders. No edicts this time, only words that might bleed. Oral's fingers ripped through the wax seal on the ledger, the sharp crack echoing in his empty quarters like a breaking bone. Names bled across the vellum, his mother's, scrawled in frantic ink beside tallies of blood packs from Leora's early reign. Border massacres, villages razed to ash. His own, where father had burned and mother had begged, all tied to the queen's desperate alliances with feral clans. The treaty that bartered him as a child, a footnote, her signature chaining his humiliation to those slaughter fields. Leora's laugh echoed in his skull, not girlish mockery now, but the cold blade of a ruler who devoured the innocent to forge her throne. He slammed the book shut, chest heaving, the half-vampire pulse in his veins surging hot. Proof. He was living proof her stability fed on bones like his family's. No wonder she'd stared through him these weeks, her touches fleeting as if he were tainted goods returned. Unlovable, used up again. The door to the corridor flew open under his palm. He didn't glance back at the rumpled bed where her scent still clung. Boots struck marble as he stormed toward the palace gates, mind racing ahead to the human enclaves beyond. Varro's whispers had planted this ledger like poison, but the truth was hers. He'd rally the border lords, fan the old grudges into flame, let her rule crumble without her pawn. Guards stiffened at his approach, pikes glinting under torchlight, but none barred him. Oral's envoy status still bought passage, for now. The massive iron gates groaned inward, night air thick with mist and the distant howl of thrall hounds. One step over the threshold and the court's web snapped. Freedom tasted like ash, but revenge like purpose. Leora burst into his quarters moments too late, the door banging against stone. Empty. Bed unmade, desk ravaged, only the ledger's ghost in the air, Varro's doing, that serpent's seal faint on the floor. Her fangs ached as she snatched a discarded page, the words searing. Blood pacts, her own hand authorizing the border purges to stem the clan wars. Innocence culled for the greater throne. Oral's mother's name leaped out, linked to the child treaty she'd dismissed with laughter to mask her grief-ravaged heart. Gods, the fractures she'd wrought. That massacre had been her first scar, the attachment to a fallen advisor sparking rebellion, bodies piling until she'd cauterized it with iron will. No more losses. Yet here he stood in her mind's eye, walking away, repeating the void. Fear clawed raw up her throat, unbidden, losing him would echo that ancient gutting, the loneliness she'd armored against. Cloak whipping, she vaulted down corridors, courtiers scattering like shadows. The gates, she snarled at a thrall who bowed trembling. Her speed blurred the world to streaks of obsidian and silver. Vulnerability was terror, but letting him go was defeat. Not domination this time, repair or bleed out. Oral hit the outer courtyard, gravel crunching underfoot, the gates yawning 30 paces ahead. Wind tugged his cloak, carrying the court's jasmine wrought one last time. A shout cracked the air, "Envy Martin," but he didn't turn. Footsteps thundered, too swift for human, her. She materialized before him in a whirl of black silk and fury, blocking the archway, eyes molten silver. Guards flanked at a distance, hands on hilts, but she waved them back with a slash of her palm. No audience for this unraveling. "You walk with her poison in your hand," Leora said, voice low thunder, gesturing at the absent ledger. "Varro's lies twisted to chain you." He halted 10 feet from her, fists balled, the half-vampire in him itching to lunge but held by the old wound. "Lies. Your packs butchered my kin, Queen. Mother pawned me to buy your mercy, and you laughed." The memory stabbed, childoral on his knees, promising eternal service, her giggle slicing deeper than any fang. "I was your proof, innocence for your crown. I'm done being consumed." Her breath caught, visible in the chill, raw, unguarded. She stepped closer, power humming off her like heat from coals, but her hands stayed open, no command in her stance. The imbalance loomed, her eternity against his fragile span, her throne against his grudge. "I laughed to bury pain, not mock you, those pacts. I chose the realm over hearts. Massacres bought us breath." Fear flickered naked in her gaze, the first crack in her fortress. "Stay, let me prove it's not repetition." Oral's pulse hammered, her nearness a torment, those eyes that had softened in private moments, tracing his scars, her fingers lingering on his ward's lessons with Rowan. Tenderness he'd craved, now poisoned. But the ledger's weight dragged him back, used again. "Prove. By keeping me leashed, your rule eats what it touches." He sidestepped, boots scraping stone, gates beckoning. "Rowan's safer without my taint stirring unrest." Leora's hand twitched toward him, then fell, consent in the restraint, agony in the release. "Flight won't heal it. You'll lead them to more graves." Her voice fractured, historic loss mirroring in her stance, shoulders squared but eyes hollow. Losing him shredded her anew, the loneliness she'd fled roaring back. But risk the realm for desire? No. Go then, the bond breaks. He held her stare one beat longer, breath suspended in the lie of it, once screaming against betrayal. Then he pushed past, shoulder brushing her cloak, the contact electric. Gates swallowed him into mist-shrouded wilds, plans hardening, enclaves first, whispers of ledgers next. Unrest would come, her laughter his spur. She watched his silhouette dissolve, fangs piercing her lip to stifle the howl. Guards murmured, but she silenced them with a glare, turning inward. Varro would answer for the ledger, but the fracture was hers, decisions carved in blood, attachment the fatal flaw. The throne room called, empty as her chest. Domination remained, tenderness fled. Both believed it shattered, him, a used relic, her, a queen too scarred for partnership. The court held its breath, intrigue coiling tighter. The throne room doors crashed inward, splintering oak under the scout's frantic shoulder. Blood streaked his face, fangs bared in exhaustion as he collapsed to one knee before Leora. Majesty uprising at the border. Rebels stormed the watchposts. They've seized the village square, 24 hostages. Mostly human laborers screaming for the end of the punitive ordinance. Leora's hand tightened on the throne's arm, the carved gargoyle biting into her palm. The court froze, silks rustling to stillness, eyes darting like cornered rats. Varro glided forward from the shadows, his ledger tucked under one arm, voice smooth as venom. "Execute them all, my queen. Precedent demands it. The ordinance is clear. Dissenters and their sympathizers forfeit life to preserve the blood peace." A swift cull quells this before it spreads. Murmurs rippled, courtiers nodding like puppets on Varro's strings. Leora's gaze sliced to him, hunger twisting in her gut not for blood but the fracture he'd widened. Oral's parting shadow still burned behind her eyes, his defiance a mirror to her own isolation. Execute innocence? The old law, etched in her ascension decree, had kept the realm intact through centuries of skirmishes. But now it choked her, demanding more than stability, demanding she become the monster they whispered of. "Details," she snapped at the scout, ignoring Varro's expectant lean. "Numbers, arms," the man wheezed, clutching a gash across his ribs. Hundreds, armed with smuggled steel from the human enclaves, they're chanting your name, Majesty, Leora the Cruel. The hostages shield them, any strike hits civilians first. Varro's lips thinned. Precisely why the blade falls now, mercy invites anarchy. "We've hostages here too," Rowan's little circle of half-blood pets in the East Wing. "Execute the border lot," and the message echoes. Rowan's name landed like a blade in her ribs. The boy, her ward, fragile thread of something softer in this crypt of power. Varro's eyes gleamed, testing her fracture. She rose, shadows clinging to her gown like lovers' hands. "Convene the council." No orders until a distant clamor cut her shouts from the outer halls, steel clashing. The uprising hadn't stopped at the border. Oral pressed against the watchtower's crumbling wall, heart slamming as rebel torches lit the village square below. Smoke choked the air, thick with the screams of chained civilians, women clutching children, men bloodied from the first clash. The punitive ordinance hung over them like a noose. Any border breach meant collective slaughter, humans first to purge weakness. Leora's law, forged to starve rebellions, had birthed this one. He'd ridden hard from the palace, envoy seals still hot in his pouch, meant to negotiate trade before dawn. Now, rebels dragged a girl no older than Rowan toward the pyre stack, her cries piercing the night. For the queen's blood tax, no more bartered children. Oral's fangs ached, half-vampire veins burning with borrowed night sight. Defect. The word clawed him. Join them, torch the tower, free the square. His mother's ghost urged it. She'd pawned him as a boy for a treaty Leora had laughed away. These rebels saw him as kin, not relic. One shout and he'd vanish into their ranks, safe from court games, from her cold eyes that promised connection then snatched it. But Rowan's face flashed pale, scarred, the boy who'd clutched his sleeve yesterday, whispering of nightmares Varro stoked. And the innocents here, faces like his own forgotten kin. Defecting wouldn't save them, it'd paint targets on every half-blood left. Leora needed warning, the rebels' numbers swelled, mages among them chanting rift spells. Palace wards wouldn't hold without alert. He gripped his dagger, breath ragged. Survival screamed, "Flee alone," but the girl's sob broke him. Not again. No more watching from shadows while power chewed the weak. He vaulted the wall, cloak snapping, sprinting for his horse amid the chaos. Palace-bound, for Rowan for them. Rebels spotted him mid-stride. "Envoy, traitor pup, join or burn." Oral wheeled his mount, steel biting air as he parried the first arrow. "The queen's not your end." He spurred hard, hooves thundering over corpse-strewn dirt. Defect would be easy death. This, racing into fangs and betrayal, was choice. Palace corridors ran red by the time Oral burst through the breached east gate. Rebels had pierced the outer veil, spies, no doubt Varro's engineered thorns, turned wild. Guards clashed in the atrium, but deeper toward Rowan's wing, silence screamed wrong. He shoved past a fallen sentinel, boots slick on marble veined with blood. Rowan, the boy's door hung ajar, Varro's enforcers inside, 3 vampires in black, chains rattling. Rowan huddled in the corner, eyes wide on a cluster of wide-eyed half-blood children, palace wards like him, trembling as iron collars clicked shut. Hostage protocol, one enforcer growled, fangs flashing. Varro's order leverage against the border filth. Oral lunged, dagger plunging into the nearest throat. Hot blood sprayed, the vampire crumpling with a gurgle. The second world, claws raking air, Oral twisted, slamming elbow into jaw, then blade up through the ribs. "Get the children out," he barked at Rowan, who scrambled, herding the sobbing cluster toward the hidden servants' passage. The last enforcer charged, pinning Oral against the wall. Fangs grazed his neck, breath fetid. "You'll swing with them, half-breed." Oral kneed hard, twisting free, dagger finding heart. He staggered, ribs cracked as Rowan slammed the passage door behind the innocents. "Go hide them in the crypts," the boy nodded, terror cracking his voice. "Oral, you came back." Gunfire echoed from the halls, rebels deeper in. Oral hauled Rowan up, racing for the throne room. Varro's precedent would slaughter them all now, stability be damned. Leora spun as the throne room doors heaved again, this time under Oral's bloodied shoulder. He half-carried Rowan, the boy's face buried in his side, both streaked in gore. Courtiers gasped, Varro's face twisted, ledger forgotten. "Rebels inside the walls," Oral rasped, shoving Rowan behind him toward her throne. "Borders lost hundreds, mages ripping wards." "They're here for the half-bloods, for him." Varro stepped forward, hand raised for guards. "Seize the envoy, he's consorted, enough." Leora's voice cracked like thunder, fangs descending fully for the first time in years. The court recoiled. Oral met her eyes, defiant, bleeding, but steady, not fleeing. Saving, her chest hollowed, the old wound gaping, attachments cost, bodies piled from her last softness. But here he stood, breaking his walls for Rowan, for her realm. She seized Varro's ledger, ripping the punitive ordinance page free, ancient vellum crumbling in her grip. "The ordinance ends. Now, dismantle every clause, no more collective executions, no border culls, no sacrificed wards. Dispatch heralds amnesty for the hostages if they stand down." Varro paled. "Majesty precedent, the court." Shocked, she hurled the shreds at his feet, stepping between him and Oral. Her hand brushed Oral's arm, deliberate, electric consent in the linger. "Witness, I relinquish the blood edict's fangs, no more expendables, not him, not them." Silence crushed the room, heavier than any decree. Courtiers whispered, loyalties fracturing like ice. Varro's jaw clenched, but he bowed, retreating into shadows. Rowan peeked out, clinging to Oral's leg. Oral's breath caught, gaze locking hers, stubborn fire meeting raw need. The uprising raged outside, but here in the fracture choice bloomed, tenderness, not domination. Risked, chosen, rebel horns blared closer. Leora nodded once, sharp. "With me." Oral gripped Rowan's thin shoulder, shoving the boy behind a marble pillar as rebel horns shattered the night. Leora's command, "with me," still hung in the air, but the throne room doors exploded inward, Varro's loyalists pouring through like black floodwater, their fangs bared and blades drawn. "To the dais!" Oral barked, drawing his silver-laced dagger, heart slamming against his ribs. He wouldn't let them touch her. Not her, not the boy. Rowan whimpered, clutching Oral's coat, his half-vampire eyes wide with terror. Leora whirled, her gown ripping as she yanked a ceremonial sword from its wall sconce, the blade humming with ancient blood wards. But Varro was already there, striding from the shadows of the breached hall, his chancellor's robes stained with the guards he'd slaughtered. "Your reign ends tonight, Leora," he snarled, voice carrying over the clash of steel. "The court demands strength, not your half-blood dalliances." His followers, 24 courtiers turned traitors, fanned out, cutting off escape, their eyes gleaming with the promise of ascension. Aurel's blood roared, no time for fear. He lunged forward, positioning himself between Leora and the advancing line, Rowan tucked safe at his back. "Rowan, stay down, crawl under the throne if you have to." The boy nodded, vanishing into the shadows. Aurel met the first attacker's strike, parrying with a grind of metal that jarred his arm. Another flanked him, he kicked out, boot connecting with a knee in a wet crack. "Leora, the side passage behind the tapestry, get Rowan out." She didn't move, slashing through a traitor's guard instead, her movements a lethal blur. Varro laughed, cold and precise, directing his men like pieces on a board. "Foolish envoy. You think your mortal scraps can hold us?" A crossbow bolt whistled past Aurel's ear, embedding in the pillar. They were closing in, too many. Aurel's mind raced, defensive, not around the throne, by time for her to rally the loyalists outside. He grabbed a fallen torch, swinging it in a wide arc to force space. "Form up, shields to the front, protect the queen." 3 loyal guards burst from a side door, heeding his shout, clanging shields into a ragged wall. Aurel fought at the center, dagger flashing every block, and thrust a desperate bid to shield her flank. Blood slicked the floor, theirs warm and metallic. A blade grazed his side, fire blooming, but he pressed on, voice raw. "Hold the line, for the realm, not the man." Varro broke through on the left, his own sword aimed at Leora's throat. Aurel saw it coming, the Chancellor's eyes alight with triumph. No choice. He threw himself forward, intercepting the blow with his body, steel biting deep into his shoulder. Pain exploded white-hot, but he twisted, locking Varro's arm and driving his dagger home into the gap under the ribs, not fatal, but enough to stagger the bastard back. "Run!" he gasped to Leora, blood bubbling from his lips. "Take Rowan, I'll hold them." She froze for a split second, eyes locking on his, something raw cracking through her iron mask. But Varro recovered, roaring as his men surged. Aurel shoved her toward the tapestry, exposing his back fully. "Go, I trust you to end this, I'm not that boy anymore." "I'm staying." The words tore out of him, a vow sharper than any blade. He couldn't flee like before, bartered and broken, not when she'd shown him what trust could forge. Leora vanished through the passage with Rowan, her hand brushing his bloodied one in a ghost of a touch. Aurel turned, facing the tide alone now, guards falling around him. Varro's sword rose again, then halted. Horns blared anew, but these were royal, loyal forces storming the hall. Aurel collapsed to one knee, vision blurring as the fight turned. Minutes later, or hours, he came to in the throne room's heart, propped against the dais steps. The rebels knelt in chains, Varro bound at their center, his cunning face twisted in defeat. Leora stood before the assembled court, summoned by urgent bells, her gown torn and bloodied, Rowan's small form clutched to her side. The air thrummed with tension, courtiers whispering, eyes darting between their queen and the chained chancellor. "Varro," she said, voice steady as glacial ice, "you sought the throne through betrayal, speak your defense." He lifted his chin, unbowed. "Stability demands sacrifice, Majesty. Your softness, the half-blood envoy, the whelp invites chaos. Strike us down. Bind packs of blood to ensure loyalty or watch the realm fracture." Murmurs rippled. A lady in crimson stepped forward, her voice laced with venom. "He's right, you've weakened us." Leora's gaze swept the hall, lingering on Aurel, his wound hastily bound, Rowan peeking from her shadow. She sheathed her sword. "No," the word fell like a guillotine. "I will not. Hear me, from this night royal prerogative ends. No queen, no king shall wield unchecked power. A council of envoys elected from all bloodlines will ratify decrees, and blood pacts forbidden on innocence. No more bartered children, no coerced oaths. We rule by choice, not chains." Gasps echoed. Varro sneered. "Madness, you'll lose control." "I already have," she cut in, sharp. A courtier lunged forward, words spilling like acid. "Weakness, you've doomed us for immortals, bedwarmer." Another joined. "The old ways kept us strong." Leora's hand trembled on Rowan's head, but her voice held. "Strength. Your old ways birthed this coup. Bodies piled for stability, no more. She knelt before the throne, not on it, pulling Rowan with her, exposing her neck in a gesture that silenced the hall. Vulnerability incarnate. If control is your demand, take it. But know this, I choose lives over thrones. Vote now, council or carnage. Chaos erupted, shouts, accusations, but hands rose, slow at first, then in waves. Loyalists outnumbered the hardliners. Varro's face drained of color as the tide turned. Oral watched from the steps, pain throbbing, pride swelling fierce. She'd refused the savage path, paid with her authority, and the court bent. As the votes tallied, Leora crossed to him, Rowan trailing. She dropped to one knee eye level, her fingers gentle on his wound. No command, no queenly distance. You stayed, she whispered, voice fracturing, exposed everything. He met her gaze, breath catching, had to for you, for this. His hand covered hers, tentative, the power gap yawning but bridged in that touch. Consent in the quiet press, trust earned in blood. She leaned closer, forehead to his, Rowan pressing between them like a seal. Then we build it together, no domination. Chosen? The court watched, hushed, as Varro was dragged away, not executed, but confined for trial under new laws. The palace horns fell silent. Precarious, yes, the council loomed with teeth of its own, but in her eyes he saw it, the cold weaponized no more, tenderness chosen. And for the first time, staying didn't feel like surrender. Oral's hand tightened on the arm of his chair as Varro rose in the council chamber, his gaunt face twisting into a snarl. This is folly, Majesty. Strip my title and you invite chaos. The old laws demand blood for such presumption. The Chancellor's eyes flicked to Oral, venomous, promising retribution even as the assembled lords shifted uneasily, their whispers like rustling grave shrouds. Leora didn't flinch from her throne, her voice a blade unsheathed. Your title ends here, Varro. For engineering threats that spilled innocent blood, you are exiled to the border holds. No more whispers poisoning the court. She gestured sharply, and two armored guards, loyalists who'd sworn fresh oaths that dawn, seized his arms. Varro thrashed, hissing curses, but the chamber doors slammed shut behind him, muffling his final roar. Oral's pulse hammered, the air thick with the scent of polished obsidian and drying ink from the new decrees scattered on the table. He met Leora's gaze across the room, her pale features unyielding, but a flicker there, relief, perhaps, or the weight of what came next. The council, now halved by her purges, murmured assent as she unrolled the first reform. A high tribunal of mixed bloods to check royal edicts, no longer her word alone. Punishments rewritten, no more collective lashes for a single thief's crime, innocents spared, debts paid in labor instead of lives. One lord, a wiry vampire named Alara with scars from Varro's old regime, leaned forward. And the envoy, Martin, stands as witness to your changes. What role for him, if not pawn? Leora's chin lifted, her eyes locking on Oral's. Oral Martin is no pawn. He will serve as arbiter of the human accord, voice for the districts, seat on this tribunal with veto on matters touching mortal lives. Autonomy, not barter. The words landed like a gauntlet thrown. Oral stood, his half-vampire senses sharpening the room's tension, the faint copper tang of fierce sweat from the human aides, the cool draft from high windows veiling the eternal night outside. This was it, not a cage disguised as honor, but a door cracked open. Yet his old wound throbbed, that child's memory of her laughter echoing in his chest. He stepped to the table's edge, voice steady despite the knot in his throat. Arbiter. It recognizes what I am, not meet for treaties. But boundaries, Majesty, I advise, I judge, but I bow to no whim. And Rowan, my counsel, reaches him first, unfiltered. No more children bartered in shadows. Her lips parted, a breath catching, visible only to him in the charged silence. The council held still, power tilting palpably. Agreed, she said finally, low and deliberate. Your word binds as mine does, test it and see. He nodded once, sharp, the scar of humiliation easing, not gone, but no longer his chain. The lord scribed the terms, seals cracking wax like breaking bones, and Oral sat heavier, the weight of real choice settling in his bones. Days blurred into the court's slow reconfiguration, but Leora moved with precision. In the grand atrium, under chandeliers dripping crimson crystal, she knelt before Rowan publicly, guards and courtiers watching, as she clasped a silver medallion around his neck. Wards of the crown now bear this, sanctuary from old hunts. No blade touches you without my hand first. The boy's wide eyes darted to Oral, standing at her shoulder, and he clutched the charm, a fragile smile cracking his scarred face. Rowan whispered, even. If I run, Leora's hand lingered on his shoulder, tender but firm. Especially then, we protect what we choose. That afternoon, edicts rolled out to the human districts, granaries guarded by mixed patrols, no more midnight levies for vampire feasts. Oral walked the outer walls with her, overseeing the first shipment, sacks of grain thumping into carts under torchlight. A human elder bowed, wary but unbroken. No tricks then, he asked Oral. No tricks, Oral replied, glancing at Leora. Her profile was stark against the flickering flames, exhaustion etching faint lines she'd never admit. Long term, watch it grow. She didn't smile, but her fingers brushed his in the shadows, a silent anchor amid the murmurs of approval rippling through the crowd. Nights wove them tighter, routines carving space amid the court's wary hush. In the private solar, firelight dancing on tapestries of forgotten wars, Oral found Rowan curled by the hearth, sketching crude maps of the palace gardens. "Want to see the real ones?" Oral asked, sliding down beside him. The boy nodded, hesitant, and they traced paths together, escapes, hideouts, dreams of green beyond stone. Leora entered later, shedding her crown like shed skin, 2 loyal attendants trailing with trays of warmed blood and bread. Myra, a sharp-eyed vampire maid who turned against Varro's spies, poured quietly. Tomas, the human steward, portioned slices with steady hands. "Family supper," Leora said, voice roughened by the day's decrees. She sat cross-legged on the rug, unqueenly, and passed Rowan a cup. "No protocols tonight." Oral tore bread, the simple act grounding him. "Varro's letters from exile, threats still, he calls this weakness." Her eyes met his over the flames, raw. Let him, weakness was hiding. Rowan leaned into her side, and she didn't pull away, though her free hand clenched. Oral saw it, the old massacre's ghost in her stiffness, the fear of loss. He reached across, covering her knuckles. "We tend the scars," he murmured. "Openly," she exhaled, leaning into the touch. "Imperfect promises, but ours." Myra smirked from the corner. "Better than Varro's certainties." "Those killed more than they saved." Tomas nodded, refilling plates, the room filling with quiet talk of patrols, of Rowan's lessons, of boundaries holding firm. Weeks ground on, the court adapting like a beast to new reins. Oral vetoed a tribunal ruling on a district raid, forcing Leora's own assent. She yielded publicly, chin high, the power shared no longer a threat but a tether. Rowan bloomed in stolen garden hours, dirt under his nails, laughter pulling reluctant smiles from them both. Leora confessed one dawn, alone in her chambers as Oral lingered post-council. "I laughed then at your promise, child's vow against my walls, it scared me your fire." He traced the line of her jaw, powers imbalance a hum between them, consent in every paused breath. "No longer defines me, and you, tenderness isn't surrender." She pulled him closer, the kiss fierce, haunted. "Ruling demands it, chosen." No miracles bloomed, no past erased, Varro's shadow lingering in border whispers, scars itching under fresh skin. But the rules redrawn held, love threading law, a court breathing where once it only bled. Staying felt like building, precarious and alive.